Thanks for joining us for another Bronftalk. My name's Adam Shapiro. I'm a 2009 fellow, and we have a great conversation today about musical performance and the future of musical performance, and whether this is something that we're mourning that we've lost, or whether there's an opportunity for hope right now to reimagine something new. So let me jump in and introduce our speakers. 2010 fellow Aryeh Nussbaum Cohen is a countertenor who is acclaimed as a young star and complete artist by the New York Times and extravagantly gifted by the San Francisco Chronicle. His first commercial recording, the world premiere recording of Kenneth Fuchs' Poems of Life with the London Symphony Orchestra, won a 2019 Grammy Award. His most recent commercial recording features his role as David in Handel's Saul with the Philharmonia Baroque Orchestra and Choral. He's a Brooklyn native and currently lives in San Francisco. Hey, Aryeh. Deborah Mintz is a 2004 fellow and a transformative prayer leader and musician. She has served innovative institutions around the country as a teacher of Torah and communal Jewish music. As the community singing consultant of Hadar's Rising Song Institute, Deborah serves as a resource to those seeking to cultivate the grassroots musical and spiritual creativity of the Jewish people. She's a Wexner Graduate Fellow and is currently pursuing rabbinical ordination at JTS. Hey, Deborah.
Hello, thank you for having us, and it's just really nice to have a moment with the Bronfman community.
Absolutely, thank you for doing this. So I'd love to do a couple things to start. And actually, if at any point anyone watching has questions, there's a Zoom participant that's labeled questions, and so you can just message me there with questions, and we'll bring you into the conversation as quickly as we can. But I'd love to hear from you, Aryeh and Deborah. Like, what has there been a moment of live performance that stands out to you, or otherwise, is there sort of music you're listening to these days you want to talk about? So yeah, Aryeh, what have you been listening to?
Yeah, what have I been listening to? Everything and nothing. It's interesting. There's been so much like online content that, at least like for me, I have not felt that sort of up to engage in. I don't know. It's been a kind of a weird time. Like there's more than ever online, at least within opera and whatnot. But it still feels like a little too close to home. So I haven't actually. Only one time have I sat down and watched one of these kind of full operas that's been being streamed. But yeah, so I've been listening to, honestly, a lot of non-classical music, but or a lot of non-operatic music, and kind of turning, I guess, a lot to the kind of artists and composers that I sort of turn to in general times of need, as it were, on long walks and things, but nothing too profound.
And Deborah?
It's funny. I experienced this moment as kind of like going through a breakup. Like I feel like I'm like in the middle of breaking up with like communal singing and live music. And just like if you're going through a breakup, your kind of like instinct is to actually kind of lean into the music that just makes your heart break even more. Like that's part of the healing process. So for me, like really close, intense power harmonies that are like the magic of creating music live in a room are what I love the most and what my heart is like most broken for right now. So I've been listening to a lot of my favorite power harmony heartbreak lady hits, namely Brandi Carlile. She's an incredible singer-songwriter. She has these two backup singers who are twins with twin voices and the most amazing blend. And that's actually also my most powerful live music moment was when I saw her live at Madison Square Garden just under a year ago with a packed house of people who loved her harmonies as much as I did. And I'm imagining that their hearts are broken right now as well.
Mm. And what, Aryeh, is there sort of a moment that stands out to you, or is there something you want to say about what makes a powerful live performance?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about that kind of communal feeling, like that feeling that is the impossible thing to sort of recreate online right now. But that feeling of being in an audience of people who are sharing an experience, whether it is like Bruce Springsteen at the Barclays Center, like me seeing him for the first time after like growing up absolutely adoring his music, or whether it's like me sitting for the first time at La Boheme at the Metropolitan Opera, seeing an opera for the first time and like feeling the kind of heartbreak along with these like thousands of other people who are also like silently sitting on the edges of their seats, like at the moment that, spoiler alert, Mimi is dying, or so I think for me it's about that like communal, that communal feeling. Like that's what makes it powerful and special.
Hmm. And I wonder if maybe we can like talk a little bit. I did read the formal awkward biographies, but hopefully you can add a little bit more color to those. And I'd love to hear a little bit about your musical journeys and how you got to where you are. So Aryeh, can you talk? And I guess in your case, like maybe just start with, for those who don't know what a countertenor is, can you just kind of explain and how you kind of discovered your gift in that area?
Yeah, absolutely. So a countertenor kind of most simply is, at least in like the classical or operatic singing world, a man who sings in the vocal range traditionally associated with a woman. But it's kind of much more common in pop than, or other kinds of music than you would realize. I mean, if you think about most male pop stars, whether it be Sam Smith or Justin Bieber or back to the Bee Gees or anyone, I mean, so much sort of falsetto, kind of men singing in that higher voice. But in opera, it's really viewed as this sort of like strange thing, like this kind of small niche. But yeah, so I sort of kind of came to it accidentally. I grew up in Brooklyn and singing in children's choir. And I was in this treble children's choir that was doing all these amazing gigs at Carnegie Hall and Lincoln Center and singing backup for Elton John and Billy Joel and James Taylor and all these amazing people. And it was mostly girls and a few boys whose voices hadn't dropped. And then when my voice dropped, I didn't want to leave the choir because we were doing all these amazing gigs. So I kind of asked them if I could stay in the choir, and they had me sort of re-audition, and I finagled and sang the high notes that used to be sort of natural, that I was now kind of finding a way to sing now that my voice had dropped. And I guess I did a convincing enough job. They let me stay in the choir. And so that's kind of how I became a countertenor. I was just kind of singing in choirs my whole life, basically up through high school and into college. When I went off to Princeton, I had no intention of being a countertenor as a career. I mean, I didn't even call myself a countertenor. I just was an alto in the choir. But yeah, and then while I was at Princeton, everything kind of changed, and I saw my first opera and sort of started off on this path that then has had its kind of twists and turns. I wanted to go like get a voice degree after school to get a master's, and I got rejected from all the programs I applied to. So then I just sort of like made my own little program. I moved back to New York and worked as an SAT tutor, and and just kind of like had my own lessons and coachings and whatnot. And then I sort of got lucky, and the next year after that, in 2017, I won the Metropolitan Opera competition and got this great review in the Times that kind of started my career overnight. So yeah, that's sort of, I guess, sort of how my path was.
It's interesting though. I had no idea that like, I'm a little bit surprised to hear that being a countertenor was at least somewhat of a deliberate choice. Like, would you still say that in some sense you could sing in a lower range than you normally do? Like, does it still feel like there's like, I don't know if that question makes sense, but sort of two singers?
No, yeah. Totally. Basically, the way it works due to what we call muscle memory, I mean, the same sort of pitches, the same frequencies of vibration that are the lower half of my countertenor range would be the upper half of my kind of normal male baritone range, or whatever it would be. So you can't really do both at the same time, or the vocal cords literally just get confused and can't figure out what to do when you ask them to vibrate at a certain frequency. But I say I'm like a pretty decent countertenor, but the world's worst baritone, because I've just never sung in that voice, because I just never trained it. I've always been a countertenor, kind of whether purposefully or by accident. So, if I wanted to tomorrow, I guess I could start trying to train as a baritone, but it would take a really, really long time for me to sound decent at all.
Right, that's fascinating. And so Deborah, I wonder, what about you? How did you sort of find yourself doing the work you're doing now?
Well, first of all, I just want to say, my background is in classical voice as well, and coming from that world and knowing the ins and outs of that world, just Aryeh, hearing your story, it's totally astounding. Like, to win the Met competition ever is unbelievable, and to win it after being rejected from graduate programs, and that's just a pretty delightful story. So in some ways, I have a little bit of almost like a kind of parallel opposite journey to Aryeh. I grew up a classical cellist, found my passion for singing actually through leading prayer at my shul growing up. and started taking voice lessons in high school. Pursued classical voice at the conservatory at the University of Michigan for my undergraduate degree, and really thought I was going to go the classical singer route. And then at some point, partway through, my interest started to sort of diverge into wanting to explore more about the ways that music functions as a gathering tool in communities, particularly faith-based communities. I was thinking more and more about the Jewish music of my childhood and the that I was so immersed in my shul, and the role that it played in my own life. So about halfway through college, I shifted from, I stayed in the performance program, but I shifted my focus to ethnomusicology. And I began to travel around the world, both in formal programs and informally, just traveling, just trying to learn and hear and understand better the way like the rubber hits the road, the way music is really used in different communities. So I traveled all around the world for on and off for a couple of years, and really immersed myself in different musical traditions. And when I finally came back to the United States, I felt really ready to kind of take all of that hubbub in my head and bring it back into my own tradition and the music of my own heart. And I began to explore different synagogues and minyanim in New York City and in Brooklyn. And eventually I started to meet the musicians in the Jewish music world and the Shlichei Tzibur and the Baalei Tefillah, the prayer leaders, and learn more about like nigunim and Jewish music. And eventually I found myself composing and recording and working as a collaborative musician. I work with a lot of different musicians around the country. One of my primary collaborators is Joey Weisenberg, who is the founder and co-director of Hadar's Rising Song Institute, which aims to cultivate Jewish spiritual life through song. And I now work for that organization as a consultant to Jewish communities around the country who are trying to sort of understand and dig deeper a little bit what I was searching for, like how does music function spiritually in this moment? And my particular interest lies in the modes and the music in the moments of prayer, and how prayer and music come together and sort of create a new experience. So that's my journey.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, especially like, so you basically have this background in theory, first of all, and then you're a composer and a performer, and now, and you know, you're also doing your rabbinical work at JTS now. So I guess I wonder, like how do you kind of get your head out of all the theory and find the kavanah and the spirit to perform and be so present and sort of not get bogged down by all the, you know, the larger questions?
Well, when you say the word theory, I don't know if you mean music theory. It's easy for me to get my head out of that because I am terrible at it. Um, but
Same.
excellent, good. That's, you know, it's more common than people realize. I, I think that because
So what do you mean when you say, because I just meant sort of like the theoretical way that people are, you know, that people appreciate music or histories of music. But you're talking about, what you're saying is like the sort of like notation. Is that more what you mean by theory just now?
when I say music theory, I mean music math.
I see, yeah.
I mean
Exactly.
the actual sort of mathematical scientific way music functions, and there are different systems for different musical cultures around the world. If we're thinking about Western music, we're thinking about like if you imagine a staff and music notes, knowing what goes where and how chords are built. That's music theory, and
Totally
I don't
opposite
think
of
about that
Kavana.
too much.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, and can I
Uh,
say too that it's a really funny thing that I think, at least like in Western music, the training in music, like when I was at Princeton, I did take music theory classes, and then I had like private theory lessons when I was building my own little program and whatnot, that it is like so intensely mathematical. Like there's all these chord analyses you do, and it's so intensely mathematical while like feeding something where the people who I think are like good at music are, you know, are not thinking about that at all. Like, you know, it's a very funny thing how kind of disconnected I think it is really from like what we're doing in the moment when we're actually performing. But
yeah. And I imagine there's some musicians who really have that sort of mathematical feel for it, but that's like a small, or at least a somewhat small subset, I'd imagine. But how do you, is that sort of a tug you feel really of balancing the, so I'll be careful with the words I use, not theory, but the sort of the larger questions of how to best produce music and what sustains communities theoretically versus actually just being in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that that tension is actually where the good stuff happens. I mean, I like even the term shaliach tzibur, the which is one of the terms for being a prayer leader. Literally translated, it means a messenger of the community, and I think that that term almost sort of captures the kind of impossible task of simultaneously um, holding the weight and responsibility of of doing a difficult task and also remaining open and humble and ready to receive. So that's true sort of in the act of prayer, and that's also true in the act of performance, that we have to both have in our head what our purpose is and what the work is and what everyone's needs are, whether it's the needs of the kahal or the needs of the audience that's there to, you know, soak up the truth and the drama, while also being, you know, just the shalech tzibur, just the messenger, right? And ready to receive from the tzibur, from the kahal or from the audience, and also ready to be just the sort of connecting piece to the divine or to the art. And I find the fact that that's almost an impossible tall order to be humbling, and also part of what I love about creating art and creating moments of prayer.
So to follow up on that, I wonder if you could talk, maybe Aryeh, and I'd love to hear you, Deborah, jump on this as well after. But sort of, what does it feel like to sort of establish that connection night after night with either other musicians you're working with or people in the audience? Like, how does it, is that a practice you have to feel like you have to re-engage in daily, or is it something you comfortably slip into?
I would say it's at least for me, like something you sort of comfortably slip into over time. But what I think is interesting is that, like, obviously you're performing, you know, in my case, like you're performing for an audience and you're there to sort of create this sense of connection for them. But that in the moment, if I'm doing my job right, I'm not actively thinking about them at all, like in any way. And that if I am thinking about the audience, then I've been totally sort of taken out of the moment that I need to be in to give them the sort of experience that they're paying for the ticket or coming to see the performance for. Yeah, but I think the thing that at least I probably miss the most, like more than actually even performing for an audience, the thing I miss the most right now, or sort of over these past few months, is the feeling of like making music with other people, that kind of connection that you sort of build over time that you can sort of slip into, especially with collaborators that you've built a relationship with. And that's the thing that it just feels like you can't create over the internet in any real way, at least with kind of what I do, where we're, you know, but Deborah, I think it's the same thing for you too, where you're obviously always coordinating with multiple people and whatnot, and there's just no way to like actually be doing things live together fully over, you know, so that at least is what I'm really kind of missing the most.
Can you just describe a little bit more what those live connections, like how important is that, or what are the sort of moments of connection between different musicians? Like, how does it add to the, let's say, to the overall performance?
Yeah, I think for me at least, it's like a totally unspoken thing. And it's interesting. Like I'm in sort of the role of the performer, but at least in my industry, the people who are sort of in charge of kind of creating the circumstances for that to happen are the casting directors and the folks who are kind of putting together the teams. And their job, at least with our world, is that, you know, I live such a kind of itinerant lifestyle where we're going from gig to gig. You sort of meet up with a group of people and you know, you prepared your part and whatnot on your own. But with concert gigs, especially, you'll have, you know, maybe 2 days of rehearsal and then you're performing like 4 performances and then you're on to the next gig. Or with an opera production, you're meeting, you know, this cast of 7 or 8 other people who, some of whom you might know from other gigs, which is kind of increasingly happening just as I've sort of worked a little bit more, which I love, but many of whom are strangers to you and you sort of have to kind of cultivate that connection. But it's this sort of, yeah, this like unspoken thing that it's funny now, just like looking back on the sort of couple years, I guess, that I've been kind of performing professionally. Um, the like engagements that have been the most special, both for me and I think for the audience, are the engagements where there was just this incredible closeness amongst the performers. In many cases, where like we haven't met before, but we just like gelled personality wise, and that's the kind of like bizarre science of it, of how do you put together this group of people who will, yeah, really like gel off the stage and on the stage in a way that allows the music making to kind of be elevated. And I think it's sort of a constant challenge.
And I wonder, Deborah, is there sort of a different sense that you have of that work, and let's say especially when you're a Shalech Tzibur or leading prayers, of connecting to the Kehillah, or is it, or do you find, or not?
I mean, I'll say that in leading davening, it's you you have to think about the kila a lot because they're in that moment they're like your backup musicians, right? They're like my singing and my leading doesn't really mean anything if I don't have like their voice in support, or rather if my voice isn't there to raise theirs up. And at the same time, as Aryeh said, like the more you start thinking about individuals, or the fact that like their spiritual needs, their musical needs are certainly not a monolith. There's going to be, the person that wants this melody and the person that hates that melody, and this person you had a fight with, and that person who, whatever. There's this teaching by Rabbi Nachman of Bretzloff that says that the job of the Shliach Tzibur is to view goodness in each person and find that one point of goodness, and that is a note, and you put those notes together, and that is the nigun of prayer.
Mm.
And that's, I think that's a really difficult teaching because it both requires me to think about everyone and value everyone and feel it's in service of everyone, while also um, like distracting me by making me kind of think about the different individualities and goodnesses of everyone and how to create something out of that, which is difficult. Um, I will say though that hearing Aryeh speak about the ways that in particularly in very intense like performative or recording spaces where you're getting together for like 48 hours to put something together and then you have to do it. The relational intensity is there's nothing else like it. I think there's no more incredible and powerful way to build really fruitful relationships than the like act of a 48-hour continuous artistic creation. I released my first full-length album just 2 months ago, and it was the 11th album that I've recorded with a particular group of people, or some combination of those people who have become this sort of like very close uh, part of my life, because a couple of times a year we meet for 48 hours and just like birth out all this new music. And each time, whoever's music it is that we're recording brings in like one or two new people that's their collaborators, and none of us know them, but the relationship becomes so instant because we're engaging in this sort of spiritual artistic process together. And I will agree with Aryeh that that is what I miss more than anything else right now, is not just live music, but live music making, like the act of taking separate notes, which Rabbi Nachman would say are the separate notes of the nigun, and like weaving them together into that nigun of community.
And you released that album during COVID. So like, did that feel, because you obviously weren't necessarily making the music then, but did just putting it out there, it certainly got a response that I'm sure it like sustained a lot of people during COVID. But did it do anything for you as a performer putting out music in that moment?
Um, yeah, I mean it was bittersweet. It was, sweet because I worked hard, and the music is very close to my heart, um and it felt meaningful to be able to communicate with so many people in a moment where communication is difficult. Um, and I mean, talk about heartbreak, like putting new music that is designed to be sung in community in a moment where we really don't know when that act will ever happen again, is bittersweet.
Mm. And for you, Aryeh, have you made, like, I know you said you're sort of ambivalent about the efforts that have been made to produce music in our COVID days, but have you sort of made an effort, or have you tried, or is it something that you're sort of trying to avoid as much as possible?
No, it's something I've certainly been doing. I think in our sort of industry, we've been trying to figure out most of the things that opera companies and whatnot have been putting out are recorded old live performances, which is fine and dandy. But there have been a good number of, I've done these sort of online videos and collaborations. But I think the real challenge is that, we're talking about that sort of like moment of connection or that feeling of connection when you're making music like live in the moment. And at least every single one of these videos, and I've probably done like a dozen of these sort of, socially distanced virtual recordings now over the last few months. And every single one, I'm recording alone, in my home, and a pianist is recording alone in their home. And, in most cases, what's been really frustrating about it, I think, to me, is that as like a classical singer, the thing that I love is the sort of like spontaneous music making that, like, if I have a pianist kind of accompanying me, that whatever artistic choice I make in a moment, whatever sort of inspiration I'm feeling, that I can kind of pursue that inspiration and they'll be right there to support me. And that's kind of their job. And that's what they're experts at doing. But that the way that we've been doing these videos is that we sort of discuss what I kind of want, and then they record a track and then I record over that. So I'm just constantly, all I'm thinking about is trying to line up with whenever they played that next chord or whatever it might be. So for me, at least, it's lost all the joy, really, in a way that it's kind of nice to put these things out. And when the videos come together, it's nice to, I guess, listen to and be like, oh, that's sort of sounds like what it usually feels like. But then in the moment, I can't feel any of that. Yeah, the thing that I love feeling, which is like what drew me to this whole career in the first place.
It sounds like, totally. Besides the fact that it takes much longer, it sounds like it's very atomized. Very makes me sad just hearing about it.
I just
Deborah,
also want to say, Aryeh,
yeah.
when you were talking about the accompanist just now, Aryeh, I just remembered from my conservatory days, and this is probably something that people outside the classical world don't know, is that the accompanist is like, it's one of the most amazing musical skills, right? To be like the piano accompanist for a classical musician, it's its own art form. And I remember at conservatory, the accompanists were like the most amazing musicians, the like strongest faculty members. You always wanted the one that you loved, that you connected with, and yeah, it really must be so hard to lose that, because it's like a duet almost, in a way that I'm not sure the folks watching even realize.
Exactly. Well, and also just that I think people don't realize, like you were talking about accompanists and whatnot, that like you get a whole degree in that. I think people just think like, oh, you're a pianist, but it's like, no, it is. It's, yeah, it's such a specialized kind of skill set that they work so hard to cultivate, and it's absolutely amazing. And as a singer, it's like the feeling of singing with, you kind of gravitate towards certain accompanists, obviously, and the people who you really gel with, it's like, oh, there's nothing better than the feeling of like that connection, right? It's like the ultimate kind of musical connection that we're sort of talking about.
Because they get you. They're like the accompanist that's like, I know what he's gonna do. I can like predict it. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly.
Can't imagine losing that right now. Deborah, I wonder, like, in your case, you're still doing performances online. Like, what have been the challenges for you?
Um, well, at the beginning, the technology was a huge challenge. I consider myself not very technologically adept. Certainly less so than many of my colleagues. It was a steeper learning curve, but I have a mic now. I got there. Technology, it was a challenge, right? As we all know, Zoom has all of these latency problems and things. Similar to Aryeh, my entire form of music making is predicated on musical collaboration and relationship in the moment. So losing that is, you have two options. You either pre-record things and layer them, which is its own beautiful art form, just not one I do as much of, um, or learning how to kind of really own an entire piece, an entire song, create an entire moment alone, which I find more spiritually interesting, even though also find it heartbreaking and scary. So my approach has been to lean more into what do I do myself with my own voice, with my own instrument? How do I dig down deep and um, and kind of sing alone and connect to that part of myself that maybe I'm thinking about less lately because I had been kind of so busy singing with other people, playing with other people, traveling to other communities. Um, how can I use this time as an offering for my own kavana and also my own skill set? So that's a little bit where I'm focusing on the online performance.
And I
Seeds of hope there.
can I just say I'm so jealous. Like I think for me the challenge is I can't accompany myself. I can't play any other instruments really, and it's like that's what's so frustrating. And it's been funny seeing some sort of opera singer friends of mine and other kind of more famous opera singers and whatnot who've sort of come out of the woodwork as like actually really good accompanists who can accompany themselves while singing at the same time. And I'm like, oh my god, hats off to all of you. But it's like something I can't do at all. And yeah, no, it totally makes sense. Obviously, like dig into being able to kind of own it entirely on your own, because being able to do that is the only way you can create, at least in my mind, like any real sense of music making right now.
Mm-hmm. So I think what we'll do now for a few minutes is sort of wrestle with that question between um, appreciating music alone and maybe reminiscing about some experiences of live music that have been meaningful or transformative. So I'll spend a few minutes in breakout rooms. If everyone can introduce themselves, say where they're zooming from, their year, and maybe just share a moment of a live performance that has been meaningful, or just how you're thinking about this moment now, like whether it's what you're missing. And then we'll come back and hopefully we can have some questions for Deborah and Aryeh. I think people are getting back into the room now. If you have any questions that you'd like to bring up, things you discussed in the room, we'd love to have as many questions as possible. So definitely please, raise your hand or message the messages profile, and would love to hear some of what you were discussing in your breakout room. We were discussing, and I would love to hear a little bit more, sort of how, Deborah, you're thinking about. You gave us a little bit of hope before the breakout room, and now kind of a realistic assessment, and you're following this closely. Like, what are sort of the hopes of seeing live performance anytime soon?
Um, I'm not super optimistic in the anytime soon part of it. I mean, certainly with outside and with some instruments, maybe. There's I'm not sure how familiar folks on this call are with this concept, but there's a question of the danger of what's called aerosols, which is certain types of particles that are expelled through like a different form of breath production than normal speech. And it's aerosols are expelled through both singing and playing of woodwinds and brass, and blowing shofar. Also, people are talking about right now.
Also, a
And
woodwind, or what kind of instrument would you call a shofar? I guess
oh,
technically,
what would you
it's
call?
not wood. I don't know, but it's
I
its
don't
own
know.
unique kind of thing in that world.
Yeah, you play it like brass, but yeah. So anything, any
Anyway,
The
singing or any
horn.
like breath, yeah. And the challenge is that the standard forms of risk mitigation that we've sort of tried to normalize, masks and distance, actually do not make a significant difference with aerosols because they create more airborne illness is the current research. So something like a singer wearing a mask and being 6 feet apart actually would not, while it might protect from speech or from coughing, it wouldn't protect necessarily from singing. And in fact, there has not been able to be established yet any form of safe distance inside singing. So the best research we have right now indicates that it's probably risky um, for people to be singing even in an extremely large room together if it's inside, even with masks. Um, and we won't know exactly how risky that is until we try it a lot, which is obviously a little bit of Russian roulette. Um, and we don't have enough research yet on the extent to which outdoors uh, like mitigates the risk of aerosols specifically. So even though certainly like we see places trying outdoor performance, I based on the research I know and the research coming out of the choral world and coming out of the also the church music world, I do not think we will see a return to public live singing in a safe way anytime soon, unfortunately.
At least here in the United States. I think that's like, to me, the really like dispiriting and sad thing is seeing all these European singer friends of mine who are starting to go back to work in these like distanced ways where they can take slight risks because like their society took it seriously and got a handle on the virus. Whereas here, you know, it's so beyond out of control, you know, and kind of past the point of no return almost in terms of spread that, you know, that we just can't take those risks basically.
And so if that's the case, or since that's likely going to be the case, what are you hearing, Aryeh, about sort of rethinking what music could look like, and even just professionally for people, and job security wise, like what are some of the discussions happening now?
Yeah, I mean, I wish there were more creative conversations going on, but at least in my like little world, I think frankly, you know, it's kind of more of the same with like online videos and whatnot, and then just sort of waiting. Like I think at least all the sort of major opera companies and concert presenters and whatever, no one's really doing anything that creative here. The only like prospect I have of work in the next 10 months at least, you know, if we're kind of hoping that there's a coronavirus vaccine by next spring, is like traveling elsewhere. Like I just got reached out to about what would be a great gig in Australia, where they have like, you know, there have been no new cases in in southern Australia like for a very long time, so they're planning on like moving ahead with these, you know, like big festivals and whatnot. And you know, where I would like fly there, quarantine for 2 weeks in a hotel room, and then be able to kind of move freely and whatnot. And you know, frankly, I'm like really hoping something like that happens, because that's sort of the only hope, you know, at least for me as like an American opera singer.
Yeah, and I guess even that's not. I mean, that could change at any point.
Yeah.
Oh, Becky, do you want to jump in with a question?
Sure. Thank you guys so much. Well, I had a few questions, but one of my questions is just curious if you guys have thoughts about what the best possible options will be for high holiday prayer that can be meaningful. And Aryeh, I know that you have also been involved, at least in the past, in high holiday prayer. So if either of you have thoughts on that, either things you know that are being discussed, or even just advice or ideas that you want to help us imagine.
I'll jump in on that. First of all, I think that the question of meaningful, right? That's so subjective, and the way I see it, there are really in the United States only two options. And we're talking right now for something that is communal, right? So not like you're with your family or your pod or whatever in your home, but for like anything congregational, I really see two safe options. One is entirely virtual, and one is outdoors with a lot of distance and no singing. And I think that you could make the argument for which is more meaningful in different directions. You know, like forgetting about the any sort of halachic issues around live streaming, right? Obviously, if that's a non-starter, that's a non-starter. But if it's not, then I think the question of, you know, which is more meaningful, being together, but being it being really short and mumble/silent, but being together in real time in that moment, or being able to sort of hear sing in your home along, explore. I'm of the mind that that in terms of meaning making, there's more opportunity in virtual. But there's something to be said for gathering together, even if you're 10 feet apart in a mask and told not to sing. But I believe that those are the only safe options, that congregate, like communities that are like in charge of like groups of people and hold the responsibility of the health of groups of people in their hands. You know, what people decide to do on their own, fine. But I think those are the only two safe options with the research we know right now, with the information we have.
Do you want to jump in, Aryeh, with how you're feeling about the Chagim, or what?
I defer to Deborah. Yeah, I mean I defer to Deborah on that. You know, I spent 6 years as a like Chazan Sheni, which I love. But you know, it's not something I'm super involved with, like sort of thinking contingency plans for right now or anything.
And in your own personal capacity, do you think will you find some meaning over the online on the Chag, or will it be more reflective or
Yeah,
chill?
I mean, I've logged on to some Kabbalat Shabbat services and things, and but I'll certainly tune in. I think online, but it's not the same. That's for sure.
But I'll also just add to my very depressing thing I just said that, well, though I think those are the only two safe options for like creating a like official gathering thing by a congregation. What is deeply unlocked right now is the opportunity for people to daven and sing and pray at home with whoever they're with, right? So that's actually a tremendous opportunity that was always available to us, and yet most of the time we opted for community. And our tradition also asks us to opt for community, right? It's considered a higher mitzvah to daven b'tzibur, to daven in a community, but if you are depressed about the options of alone and like masks and no singing or like Zoom, then thinking about what does it mean to daven like with whoever I'm at home with, if you have someone at home, could be a really spiritually robust opportunity.
Yeah, I was recently at a minyan with masks and no singing, and it was quite sad. So to hopefully give us some hope for that kind of or some strength to find that meaning as we approach the Chagim. I'm wondering if you want to bring us together as a community, Deborah, in song.
Sure. So I'll share a melody I wrote for one of my favorite psukim, favorite verses from Psalms. This is a verse from Psalm 118, which is a psalm that we say during Hallel, so it's like a moment of joyful praise. It's also a psalm that is said during the shofar service on Rosh Hashanah. So, kind of this really intense moment of declaration. And the words are min hametzar karatia anani v'merchavia, from a narrow place I cried out, and I received an answer from the expanse. And I'm quite called to this verse, particularly in this time, because there's a lot of hope in it, right? It's this sort of hopeful declaration, optimistic declaration that the answer will come. And yet it starts from the place of the Meitzar, of the narrow place. It's a hope that can only emerge when we first name that we are in a Meitzar, in a narrow place. It forces us to confront the ways that we feel constricted, which I think is important right now. So I'll share this with you, and if you enjoy it, you can listen to it on my album, which I also want to just name some gratitude for the Bronfman organization for coming in as a organizational sponsor on the record. So thank you, and I'm really grateful. Okay. Min hametzar karatia anani v'merchavia min hametzar karatia anani v'merchavia min hametzar karatia anani v'merchavia min hametzar karatia anani v'merchavia. Oh, Adonai li lo ira, ma yaseh li adama. Adonai li lo ira, oh, ma yaseh li adam. Adonai li lo ira, ma yaseh li adam. Adonai li lo ira, oh, ma yaseh li adam. Idido babo, oh, idido babo. Di-da-ba-ba-ba. Hi, hi, hi. Oh.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That was amazing. Thank you so much, Deborah. And thank you both for such an amazing conversation during such a difficult moment, and leaving us with a sense of giving us some koach to go forward as the Chagim, as the holidays approach. So very grateful to both of you. And we're going to wrap up now. There's going to be a survey that's going to come up. So if everyone could click that now before we sign off, it's pretty brief. So to really appreciate that, which will take a few moments. But yes, as Taylor just said, goosebumps. That was really, really beautiful. So can't ask for more, and grateful to both of you. So thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Aryeh. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and Yasher Koach.
Thank you.